players and AI. This is not ChatGPT throwing rocks at you. This is Halo and Destiny enemy AI shooting guns at you in games. So a little bit about me. I'm Chris Proctor. I am the weapons feature lead on Destiny 2. I have been for 4 years. I have 20 years experience all across different types of core combat gameplay design. Some of the titles that I've worked on are up there. Okay, so a quick summary before we get going. Players in Destiny and most other first-person shooters shoot hitscan projectiles. These are projectiles that impact instantly. Enemy AI in a lot of shooters, particularly science fiction, fantasy shooters, shoot projectiles that have travel time. We call these slow projectiles. We're going to talk a little bit about how these projectiles are treated differently for both players and for AI, what the different use cases are, and the challenges, and why you would want to even do it. So hitscan projectiles, they impact instantly. They hit exactly what you're aiming at, aside from edge cases like weapon bloom and that kind of thing. They can be heavily optimized or batched up for physics performance issues. They can't be deliberately dodged in most cases, with an exception that we built for Halo Infinite, which I'll talk about later. Slow projectiles, these typically require target leading and better timing than hitscan projectiles. We can make them easier to use by using splash damage on explosive projectiles, large collision spheres, and things like target tracking or projectile homing. These can be dodged because you can see them coming just a step out of the way. So I'm going to be talking about Destiny and Halo, as this is where the bulk of my experience in these systems comes from. They're both built by Bungie. The version of Halo that I worked on was Halo 5 and Infinite, which was actually at 343 Industries. But in Halo, players and enemy AI typically use the same weapons. An enemy will drop their weapon, you run over, you pick it up, you start using it. So the projectile data is the same, sometimes manipulated a little bit by the AI systems. In Halo Infinite, and enemies can also pick up weapons that you drop and shoot them back at you, which introduces another edge case. In Destiny, player and enemy AI weapons are completely different. You always come into an activity with your 3 selected weapons. You fire those. You don't have to worry about getting specific ammo for each weapon. And the enemy AI weapons, they don't drop them, and they're custom built for AI, so they're completely different. We'll be talking about player projectiles from Destiny and enemy projectiles from Halo. So this is hard and expensive. Why would we even want to do it? So for slow player projectiles, it gives us a bunch of different ways for players to express mastery over the game systems. For example, players who are used to hitscan weapons are often very good at pinpoint aiming, like shooting directly at the head of the other player that you're aiming at. But others are better at things like predicting player movement when someone's going to stick their head out, or like capitalizing on the trajectory of a slow projectile. There are radically different aiming challenges for slow projectiles. So hitscan weapons require precise aim and timing, but slow projectiles require navigating leading projectiles and recognizing opportunities for splash damage or bounce shots, things like that. This is also beneficial for delivering on specific fantasies. For example, the Hive Boomer weapon, Exterius, which was introduced in Season 22 of Destiny. There's an AI version of this weapon which shoots very slow arcing, like electrical projectiles, which detonate on impact. You just couldn't replicate that with a hitscan weapon. So the player version has projectiles that move in a similar way. Or the Fighting Line exotic grenade launcher. This has bouncing, quite slow projectiles, and the challenge is remote detonating them for maximum effect, finishing off targets who run behind cover and that kind of thing. Enemy AI hitscan weapons. So these are things like enemies with sniper rifles, but it can also cover things like close-range weapons where the projectile travel speed is so fast that you can't reasonably dodge them. We wanted to introduce more balancing options for a scenario that's otherwise very binary, like either you get hit or you don't. The AI shoots at you accurately and they hit you, or they shoot you inaccurately and they miss you. You can introduce some more variety in PvE encounter challenges using hitscan weapons that you couldn't otherwise. And in the case of Halo, it gives us the ability to consistently apply tuning across a large number of weapons. I'll talk some more about that later. When AI can use player weapons, and most player weapons are hit scan, as is still the case in Halo, like I think a third of the weapons are typically hit scan. AI have to be able to use these weapons effectively, and with a game like Halo that sets the quality for the combat extremely high, you need to support it well. Predicting and dodging an attack from a hit scan weapon is a true power moment. This isn't something you can do in very many games because you don't know exactly when an enemy is going to shoot at you. So either you're sprinting and you know they can't keep up, or you duck behind cover and they impact on the cover. The ability to move around and dodge a hit scan projectile when you're out in the open feels really powerful when you can reliably do it. Okay, there's one more reason. This is a really hard design challenge, and systems designers love solving hard problems or things that other people told you can't do. So a little bit about player aiming. I'm not going to go very deep into this because it's reasonably well understood at this point, player aiming for hit scan projectiles. Destiny's aiming systems are built on top of Halo's, so there's like more than 20 years of iteration on these. There are two basic components, an auto-aim cone, which corrects bullet trajectories towards your target, and a magnetism cone. This is sometimes called reticle friction and adhesion, which keeps your target or keeps your reticle over a target, even if they're moving around. This is only available on controller. Auto-aim is on both controller and mouse and keyboard. Hit scan projectiles are in Destiny and in Halo typically client authoritative. That is, if you pull the trigger and shoot someone, even if you have a large amount of latency, you'll tend to hit them. So if their position is slightly off, you'll still hit them. There are limits to this, of course, for security reasons. You can see the player auto-aim and magnetism codes just in that little insert there, debug turned on. Hit scan projectile player skills. We're trying to encourage precise aim. So when you're aiming at another player's head and you pull the trigger, this is precision aim. We want to encourage good recoil management. This is, the short control bursts meme. If you hold the trigger down for too long, your bullets will spray everywhere and you'll start missing a lot, even though the projectiles are hit scan. And you can enable a really run and gun playstyle in a way that's harder with slow projectiles. So you can be circle strafing someone and landing most of your shots in them because you don't have to worry about about leading your target and that kind of thing. Got a couple of videos here. Here's an example of player aiming with a rifle that has hit scan projectiles. This is the Dead Man's Tail exotic scout rifle. So it'll tick easily, circle strafe, land a bunch of shots. Next up, this is a sort of sniper power moment, kind of snap zooming on a target. Okay, so player aiming with slow projectiles is a completely different beast. We have some additional tools for aiming with slow projectiles. For example, we have the ability to calculate the speed of the projectile in advance, and the weapon can apply a small amount of bias to lead the target. So even if you're aiming directly at a target, the projectile will still lead them a little bit. We also have what we call projectile steering and tracking. These are the systems that we use for homing projectiles. So steering is if we want a projectile to move in a spiral or arc out and then back in again, that kind of thing. That's a steering behavior. And tracking is just like moving directly towards the target. Slow projectiles are sometimes client authoritative if they're fairly fast, and there are quite a lot of them. They're sometimes server authoritative if they're big and slow, and it's really important that they land in the same place on all players' screens. There are a few options for how we approach these projectiles. Dumbfire, which is the projectile itself has no smarts at all. It just goes exactly where you're aiming it. Aggressive tracking, we call this sometimes delayed hit scan, in that if you have a target lock on your enemy, the projectiles are definitely going to hit them unless they move behind cover, no matter how fast they move. And balanced, this is really, really hard, particularly in a game that has PvP. And it's something which it's really important to get right because, man, players hate being attacked by tracking projectiles. It makes them feel like the other player isn't aiming at them, whether that's true or not. So it's a different set of skills. Three basic categories: target prediction, geometry awareness, and tracking projectiles. So for target prediction, the players have to exercise mastery over leading projectiles and understanding their own projectile trajectory In a lot of cases, this is a straight line, but it can also be a slow arc, like affected by gravity. The projectile could bounce, and players need to be aware of those. For geometry, you can splash damage targets, so you'll see players jump up in the air and fire a rocket down to try and get a large number of targets in the splash area. And you need to know how a projectile is going to bounce, so you need to master sort of the bounce friction coefficient, which is how far a projectile will bounce when it impacts, and what direction it's going to go in. So understanding how the surfaces in the particular level will work. And then there's tracking projectiles, so targeting management, which is understanding how long a weapon will take to get a target lock, and the grace time and how you can exploit that. Grace time is how long after you lose track of a target, you'll continue to have a lock on that target. So with some weapons, if a target bucks behind cover and you fire a projectile around to the side, it'll arc around them anyway. So this is the mountaintop grenade launcher. This just fires a grenade in a straight line. You'll see if you're aiming directly at an enemy who's at the same level as you, it's not a very effective way to use the weapon, because if you miss the projectile, it's just totally lost. On the other hand, if you can get some splash damage or you can get a direct hit, that's quite powerful. Yeah, so just a miss. Direct impact will kill with this weapon. It's sort of an expression of skill. And yeah, you can jump in the air and get splash damage and do about half damage to a player. Okay, slow delayed hit scan. So this is projectiles that track very aggressively. In this particular case, this is the rocket pistol, which hasn't been released yet. This is coming out in Season 23. But this weapon has a perk where if you kill a bunch of enemies, you'll get extremely strong tracking for a short time afterwards. So projectiles baseline have very, very weak tracking, so a player can easily dodge them. But once you've managed to get the perk rolling, it's very effective. So the projectiles are slow enough that if someone runs around a corner and you've got this up, you can aim really wide. The projectile will come around and shoot them and probably really piss them. Okay, this is an attempt at a slow projectiles that are balanced. This is the Osteostriga exotic submachine gun. The projectiles here move in a fairly chaotic fashion, but they have reasonably strong tracking. It's quite forgiving for auto-aim cones, so you get a target lock easily, but the moment you move the reticle off someone, the projectiles will stop tracking. Like, there is a very, very short grace time. This is pretty balanced in play because the projectile stream is reasonably easily dodgeable. Individual projectiles weren't one-shot killed. This is a kind of an interesting case study of player sentiment around these types of weapons, because immediately after it launched, there was this huge uproar in the PvP community with players seeing these projectiles kind of arcing towards them no matter how they moved. People were calling it a legal aimbot, these kinds of things. But a few weeks in, once we saw the data, it was clear that it's not actually very effective in PvP. It's like a little less effective than most hit scan exotic submachine guns. So we're totally happy with that. And players realized it as well. And aside from a couple of use cases where like you get the drop on someone and they don't see the projectiles coming and they get killed in a very short amount of time because all of the projectiles are already airborne. There are a couple of cases like that, but largely it's not very effective for dueling, which is exactly what we wanted in this case. And then in PV, it's extremely strong because the AI are terrible at dodging these kinds of projectiles. So you see, it's fairly forgiving. And in the fairly hardcore, you lose auto-aim. Okay, now on to AI aiming. I'll be talking about Halo's AI since that's what I'm most familiar with. I worked on Halo 5 and Infinite AI, so I was there for about 6 years. Halo AI has a huge number of levers that you can use to control AI aiming behavior. Typically, these are set up with minimum and maximum values, so what the worst possible AI will do when they're aiming this weapon and what the best possible AI with, and that's based on difficulty level and sometimes target tier as well, and the game will interpolate between those. Halo AI is typically hand-tuned around heroic and then scaled down for normal and easy and up for legendary. So yeah, these are some of the values that we have for controlling AI aiming with slow projectiles. Accuracy, which is how far from the target they'll aim or how many of their shots will land. Target tracking, not to be confused with projectile tracking. This is how good they are at keeping up with you while you're moving. Target leading, which is with a slow projectile, whether they can predict your movement and land the shot where you're going to be. Projectile speed scaler, which is how fast their projectiles move. We can just slow them down a bit or speed them up to make them more or less challenging. Now, the projectile tracking scaler, similarly, this is for aiming projectiles. Burst geometry, which is when they fire a whole burst of projectiles and they'll sweep them across a target. So the first couple miss, and then they'll land a bunch on target, and then the remainder of the burst will miss. And there are player skills that we're trying to encourage when the AI are firing slow projectiles. So reaction time when you see a projectile in the air. For example, if a Wraith tank in Halo is launching a projectile at you that goes way up into the air, takes about 10 seconds to land, and you have plenty of time to get out of the way if you know where it's going. And you can do things like time a jump so that you take minimal damage or just dodge out of the way. In some cases, you can also deflect the projectiles or shoot them out of the air, which is a really satisfying power moment. This isn't that common in Halo. There are plenty of other games that have it. The one example in Halo Infinite is using the grapple hook, where if a brute throws an explosive barrel at you, you can grab it out of the air with the grappling hook and then catch it when it comes to you and then throw it back at them. Here's an example of a Halo brute firing a slow projectile at you. This is the pulse carbine. When I say dance in the captions here, like when we're working on Halo AI, when players can sort of deliberately move around projectiles, we call that the dance in PvE. So the first example is no dance. So the player is just moving in a very predictable way, and the AI is able to keep up with them fairly well and land most of their shots. And in the second one, the player is juking back and forth, understanding the speed of the projectiles, and most of the shots miss. Okay, so AI aiming with hitscan projectiles. This is, we have fewer leaders here because we don't have things like projectile leading values that we can use to control how often that will hit you. We rely more on the accuracy and burst geometry. Halo AI does ramp up their accuracy while the player is visible, so the longer that you're out in the open, the more accurate all of the enemies shooting at you will get. But it's very hard to tune in a way that's satisfying for players, because with a hit scan weapon, you can't see the projectile coming. You tend not to have much notice that something's about to hit you. Sometimes there's a laser sight or something like that, but that just tells you when you need to get back behind cover. That's basically your only response. Most commonly, AI hit every single shot, or they'll miss once and then hit. So if anyone remembers the Jackal snipers in Halo 2, on easy, normal, and about half the time on heroic, they will always miss the first shot, and they'll always hit the second one, and it will kill you. And on Legendary, they just hit every time, and there's nothing you can do beyond realize when they're about to hit and shoot and get behind cover. We added some updates to the AI aiming systems in Halo Infinite. The goal here was for a player's skills at dodging slow projectiles to translate into dodging hit scan. The way that the lead AI engineer decided to implement this was that there's a target on a spring attached to the player, and then instead of aiming directly at the player, AI aim at that target. And then we had variables for tuning like spring strength and like damping value and this kind of thing, dependent on difficulty and enemy tier. So a Jackal sniper will be much better at aiming exactly where you are based on difficulty than, say, a brute would be with the same weapon. Wow, that just spurted right through those. What happened? I think I skipped the end of the presentation somehow. Can we get back into that? Okay, yeah, I can scroll forward from here, thanks. Okay, so here's some images showing how this works. When the target's stationary, or when the player is stationary, the target's directly on them. If you're accelerating, the target will lag behind, but then once you're moving at consistent speed, the spring will pull it onto you, and all AI shooting at you will be able to hit you more accurately. So if you're juking, you'll constantly be moving side to side, and the target on a spring will never quite catch up to you. The player's skills here are still cover management, understanding of AI accuracy and whatnot, and also reading the AI firing tells, for example, like a charge light or a hit laser sight. The additional skills that we have in Halo Infinite are the ability to dodge out in the open with movement variations depending on the different AI weapons, with timing dependent on difficulty. Like you need to be much more precise in your movement on Legendary, and there's a bit of slop on other difficulties. Here's an example with a hitscan weapon. So again, the enemy will hit reliably if you're moving in a straight line, and then will miss fairly often if you're juking. Okay, so in conclusion, this is pretty expensive to do, particularly in Destiny. Making slow projectiles for players is very expensive in playtest time and design time. And in Halo Infinite, building this system was reasonably cheap, but the amount of data that you need to enter is massive, because it's every weapon in the game, potentially with overrides for every character in the game. But some of the experiences this let us make are the Osteostriga submachine gun, rocket pistols, remote detonation grenade launchers, and glaives, all of which are very interestingly different and provide different challenges. And the Halo AI examples, the Stalker rifle, the skewer, which brutes use, most of the UNSC, like human-like mid to long-range weapons, and sentinel beams, all of which are very different from typical slow projectiles. Now, I think we have a few minutes for questions, if anyone has anything.
Yeah, I was just wondering how you adjust the adhesion and the friction for stuff that's a slower projectile, or if you do it all. Stuff that I have to read, do you change the adhesion at all?
Yeah, so we don't typically change the strength of the adhesion, but we will change the ranges that it kicks in at. So for Osteostriga, the like magnetism auto-aim ranges are roughly double what they would be for a regular submachine gun, because the projectiles take quite a while to get to their target. All right, anything else? Yeah, Drew was first.
Thanks for your speech. Yeah, I have a question. When you talk about how this feature called auto AI, it'll help. Auto aim, sorry, yeah, auto aim. Is it console only or affect the PC players as well?
Yeah, auto aim is on all platforms and does function on mouse and keyboard and on controller. And yeah, Destiny has pretty generous auto aim, I'll put it that way. That's part of why it feels so good on most platforms. And then magnetism is controller only, but it's controller on mouse and keyboard and on console.
Is it balanced separately, and how you balance between PC and consoles?
Yeah, we find that like we do have separate balancing levers for different platforms and for different input methods, but we do find that players with mouse and keyboard have a pretty large advantage, mostly because they can spin around and like aim very quickly, and not so much that it's easier for them to shoot necessarily. There are some levers that we use to make to help catch controllers up, but outside of a few use cases like very close range combat, mouse and keyboard tends to have an edge. Who's next? Big some little shits.
Great talk, thank you. In Halo and Destiny, when you calculate enemies' accuracy, do you also take into account how many enemies there are at any given point shooting at the player? Like if there's a squad, are they on average less accurate?
Yeah, actually, Halo Infinite has a bunch of new systems to control how many AI can fire at you and how they do it. We have two systems that work here. One is a time slicing system that slows down enemies who are further away or out of line of sight, so they will get fewer opportunities to move and shoot at you. And then we have a system that controls high threat attacks, things like sniper shots or a brute with a gravity hammer running in and slamming you. And only a certain number of those AI are allowed to be active at a time. And it varies based on difficulty level, that kind of thing.
Thank you. You've mentioned that for AI hit scan aiming, you would either typically make AI hit every shot or miss the first one and then hit every consecutive one. I was wondering if that's a conclusion you came after experimenting with some sort of random chance of missing and that didn't work and that's why you decided, or is it just a principle you've always stuck with?
I was talking more specifically about slow rate of fire, high damage weapons, where you don't want a huge amount of randomness there because it's not something that the player can perceive. With weapons that are rapid fire, there's also an accuracy, like basically a hit chance. And if they roll a correct hit chance, then they aim directly at you. And if they fail, then they aim somewhere off to the side, like we have a cone, that kind of thing. What else?
Yes, hi. So the question I have is, do you take into consideration for AI aiming any time between hits system, or is it mainly about dancing and missing the first shot? So if I stay stationary as a player and I get hit consequently, does the system hit give player any chances to or rather AI to miss if player is just stationary?
No, not really. If a player is stationary, AI will tend to hit them pretty reliably anyway. We do scale up the accuracy chance over time, so maybe there's a 50% chance initially, which will ramp up to 100% over being in the open for 5 seconds or something like that. There are no mechanisms to soften that. Like if you're completely stationary, enemies will just eventually always hit you. On low difficulties, like on easy, enemies miss almost all of their shots anyway, and that doesn't change a whole lot. What else?
Thank you for the talk. I want to ask, you said that there's a system that's with a target on the spring, and is it different for different types of enemies, or is it like something inside of a character that's calculated for types of enemies?
I sort of like simplified it for purposes of explaining it, but every enemy effectively puts their own target on you, and the spring strength and like damping and whatnot is controlled per enemy. So if there are 30 enemies aiming at you, they each have their own thing, which controls that. We've got a couple more minutes, I think. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, thanks very much for being an audience. This was great.